Welcome to Intersect. This is our midweek discussion. I'm Pastor Michael from The Current. We usually wrap up and reassess the things that we looked at, the topics we looked at on Sunday, and then from there, the conversation leads us who knows where. Thanks to Hugh and Charlotte for joining me today for this discussion. On Sunday, I sort of broached the subject of symbols and symbolism and meaning. I think in part just because I'm fascinated by symbology. You know, I love the Dan Brown books with Robert Langdon, who's the symbologist. I love that the career of this guy who stars in this sort of adventure series is that he's a symbologist, and you know, his books do a really nice job of explaining the historical significance of symbols wrapped in this, you know, narrative fiction that he's also so great at. And I appreciate it because I find it fascinating also, especially with respect to religion, because religion is all about symbolism, language is all about symbolism. And part of what makes it difficult for us, I think, to relate to one another is that we often live in or are raised in, or both, the type sort of environments where meaning is different from one place to another. I mentioned that the meaning of a symbol is in large part dependent upon the context of that symbol. For example, I actually think I have it here. Let me see something. Let's see if this will come up. This might. There we go. We talked about the swastika. I thought I had it hidden in here somewhere. And this being a representation of it as the original Hindu symbol that it was. Oh, hang on, let's wait for Anne. Nice. Just connecting to audio. Connected. Hi, Anne. Thanks for joining us today. We were just talking, recapping sort of our discussion about symbols and the way that symbols change meaning over time and are dependent upon context. And I was just using the swastika as an example because, of course, originally in Hindu and even older contexts, it's a symbol for well-meaning, for good luck, a symbol of a blessing. But we, of course, most often think of it as this symbol of hate associated with fascist Germany and the Nazis. So a symbol can mean many things to many people. And I brought this all up because to a certain extent, we have an issue with symbolism in Christianity today, because the words that we use and the symbols that we use as Christians mean different things, not only to people who aren't Christians, but also to other Christians. So I thought it was important for us to sort of have a discussion about the symbols and the words that we use, especially as members of the Current, as a group who calls themselves the Current, because I don't even want to call it a church. This is part of the issue. Our church, our spiritual community is different and is striving to be something, I think, that can reach a diverse group of people. So maybe we can continue that discussion today about the difficulties or not that we have with certain descriptors that we use when we talk about either the Current or religion in general, or our personal faith, or faith in general. Faith is a tough word. These are all tough words that I personally struggle with a lot of these words as well. I've struggled with the word worship, for example, for years. I haven't wanted to call this worship because of the connotations. What about you all? Do you have any struggles? And any solutions would be awesome to hear too.
I'd like to share just, it takes us, I think it's on point here, but
Whatever.
It takes it from a little different angle in
All right,
terms
great.
of, and it's an article that I read on Progressive Christian, the Pathos website. And the title of the article is interesting because they concocted a word, and they're talking about the roots of cognicide, Cognicide. So it's the roots of our thinking. And It's written by a man I don't know, Frederick Schmidt, but it begins with a critique of progressive Christianity by saying that in our postmodern period, we've overemphasized inclusion, and because we've overemphasized inclusion, we don't have any conceptual boundaries. That, we have, and I think rightfully so, given up on dogma and criticized dogma, which once upon a time did provide boundaries, in terms of I believe this and I don't believe that. Okay. And then, after having made that case, Rowan Williams, the former Archbishop of Canterbury, says that there are three kinds of vital theological activity that complement one another. Three theological activities. And the problem is, I think we ought to rename these, but the first is celebratory theology. And that's to draw out and display connections and images to exhibit the fullest possible range of significance in the language. And of course, it relates for him to hymnody and preaching. And then he talks about communicative theology, and that's experimenting with the rhetoric of the uncommitted environment. That's, to me at least, what that's saying is using the secular language that's in our secular world, and using their vocabulary to explain what we are thinking about and experiencing in the church.
No church speak.
Excuse me?
Don't use church speak.
And then, right, don't use, that's right. And then the third theology is a critical theology, arises out of the struggle with the question as to what is continuous with what has been believed. And so that's trying to update the dogma in a sense, and speaking critically of that. I just throw that out there because I think it's on track with what you were talking about on Sunday. Now you were focusing on symbols and the words Christian, church, and worship, and that's fine. And this just kind of broadens that a bit into what are we talking about when we talk in the church, and how do we talk and how do we communicate? Anyway, I just thought I'd share that because other people are wrestling with it too.
Yeah, no, I think it's fascinating. And I saw the article that you sent too, but I haven't had a chance to read it yet. So I'm glad you shared it a little bit here. Thank you. And this is exactly what I was getting at. I was kind of using specific examples, but this really gets to, I think, the core of what I'm also thinking about in terms of language. Celebration is a great word.
Yeah.
Celebratory is a great word. Instead of calling it worship, we could say celebration. Instead of you come to the current to worship, come to the current to celebrate.
Right.
Yeah.
And the other issue that's involved with all of this, as you said, too, is the desire to be inclusive.
Right.
And if we use specifically Christian language, it's not necessarily inclusive because Christianity, frankly, is not an inclusive religion. I don't care what anybody says. The whole point of it is actually not to be inclusive.
That's right. And, early church historical precedent for that. That's what Paul was wrestling with all his life, was how to be an inclusive church and how to speak to Greeks and Romans.
Mm-hmm. And also, and what are the boundaries? Because every club has boundaries. You don't join the Ferrari Club and show up in an Aston Martin. You know what I mean? I mean, I suppose you could, but you're not going to show it off with the other Ferraris, right?
Right, right.
Because you know you appreciate different things. Not that there's anything wrong with either automobile, but you know they serve different purposes and they appeal to different people. So, which is kind of why we have a multitude of religions as well, and that's fine. But all of these things already exist. There are already Christian churches and you know Protestant churches and Catholic churches and synagogues and mosques, and there are already all these things. There are not a lot of sort of universalist, inclusive places that I think are also really multi-faith, where people can still be like their individual faith. Like we can be Christians and Jews and Muslims and Buddhists and Baha'i and stuff, but we're still in this community. And somehow we share elements of each other's faith every week, you know, with something. One week, maybe the Baha'i people do, however they do communion. And I mean, communion could be different every week. We do communion every week. And it'd be awesome to just share it with different traditions. But, you know, before you can even get there, you have to somehow be doing something where people feel comfortable. For example,
Right.
If somebody who was a Muslim creative thinker came into our church that is currently full of Christian creative thinkers, although we have a couple of, you know, unknowns or perhaps undeclareds as well. I think they'd actually feel pretty comfortable once they walked in the door, but I'm not sure they would come in the door first of all because on paper, I think we appear very Christian, even though the other problem is if somebody who was really a traditional Christian came in, they wouldn't feel comfortable because we're not traditionally Christian. We're not
Right.
talking about Jesus dying on the cross for our sins and giving thanks for that. If we're talking about it, we're discussing what it means, you know, and the many things
Right.
that it means, right?
Right.
So it's
I know.
It's interesting that Hugh brought this up today because I have been serving on a committee for our church here for their mission vision statement because we have an interim pastor and they're trying to get ready to do a search for a new pastor. And the UCC church here is a very open church and rather liberal. But as we were working on our mission statement, one of the words that popped up was progressive. Another one was inclusive because they did a survey of all the congregants to see what was important to them.
Sure.
So as we discussed on Monday, the decision was made to use the word inclusive because they worried that the word progressive might turn away someone who's a bit more traditional.
Interesting.
And, but in using that word inclusive, the statement was to be a welcoming, inclusive community of Christian faith. So the parameters were put back in essence. We're inclusive, we're welcoming to anyone who chooses to come, but basis of our church is Christianity.
Mhm.
I mean, you have to decide who you are, right?
That's
right.
right. That's
I,
right.
I think but also, which Christianity is the basis of your church?
That's
Yeah.
Because I
right.
don't think you can be both traditional and progressive. They
Well-
have different core beliefs.
They are
I think.
they are open to the LGBTQ community, to
Okay.
people of all ethnic and racial diversities. So they tend to be more of a liberal church. But there are a few who do attend just because they want the UCC background. And like for us, when we were looking for a church, we weren't comfortable with the Methodists or the Presbyterians or the very conservative Christian churches. So
Sure.
this church really appealed to us for that reason. One of their statements is, you are welcome to come where you are. We welcome you where you're at and don't expect you to be in a certain place in your faith development.
Yeah. See, that's what it's all about. That's it. That's great. It's hard to do that.
Yes.
Yeah, it's hard to interpret, you know, to say that to other people without getting into a big long lecture about what in the world I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
then you have to explain it. Well, this means this, and that, and so it's very. I find it hard, and yet I've also been thinking that there are a lot of people out there who, if they could get or get into the environment of a positive, what I call positive theology, they would welcome it because they've left a negative environment or given up on it or heard rumors about it. And so they're against that. They don't want that, but they don't seem to put themselves in an environment of positive, where there's a much more positive theology, which I call progressive theology. But
Yeah. Positive theology is a great name for it, though. Because it is,
yeah,
because it's
I've
all,
really been working on that as,
Like that. Yeah.
a
yeah, I'm writing
positive.
that one down too. You're giving me all these new keywords today.
Positive, celebratory, celebrate.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's good. These are
yeah,
all good descriptors, I think. I just again, we get a lot of views and clicks and things, on the stuff that we post, but still people aren't like coming to
I
interact.
know.
And
Yeah,
again, and not to be crass about it, but there are also the people that click and watch the stuff don't necessarily donate. Every now and then we get a $50 donation. I mean, we've been getting $500 or $600 a month from Facebook, which isn't bad. It's kind of cool, but still, I'd like people to really join
yeah,
the community, and
yeah,
especially there's
right.
there's some diversity in the comments section. So I'm not really sure what else it takes other than some of these
I
other
don't
things we've
either.
been talking about. Short video snippets. I think little video things are helpful for people, but it's still all about meaning making. Ultimately
Right.
a group of people that we want to make meaning with, and I think possibly this is the biggest difference to approach between 20th century church or anything pre 21st century church, which is, although this is maybe the original reason for getting together to church too, is to make meaning together, not to join the group to be assimilated into the group's meaning, but to join the group so that together the meaning the group makes is constantly evolving, is constantly fluid, depending on who's in the group and who's sharing which ideas. You know what I mean? Because again, I mean, I think we're blessed. I'm gonna use the word blessed. I was to say lucky, but either way, this group of people that we have on a regular basis right now are ridiculously deep thinkers, and everybody is really good at communicating what they're thinking. So I just think that's a real gift, and I think that a lot of people would appreciate that, but I'm not really sure why they don't necessarily come, other than the fact that we're still using words like Christian church instead of spiritual community or a community that celebrates positive theology. There you go. I don't know. Anne, what do you think about all this? Because you're sort of that progressive, independent, free-spirited, mindful person, and you've been with us for a while now, and you've seen some people come and go too. So,
Yeah, I just wonder, where's the line drawn between progressive Christianity and universalist Unitarian?
I've been wondering that myself.
Yeah, right.
Like, because there must be a line, and I think that's where
Yeah.
a lot of the criticism is people no one understands it.
Yeah.
I'm still
friends
trying
that
to
were
understand.
universalist, that
What's
they
that?
attended the Universalist church. I had friends, and my daughter's friend went to that church, and we visited a few times. But it was a community of educated people, I want to say. They were more intent on discussion.
Right.
There were people from the Jewish faith as well as the more traditional Christian faith that attended that church. So they did not have communion.
Mhm.
You know, this is a good point. You know, because we are very much like Unitarian Universalists in this church anyway. And the my friends in the UU have approached me several times about sort of coming over. But for me, the difference is that we still celebrate communion. It's still central to who we are for all of the very different reasons that we celebrate it. Excuse me. And our focal point is still Jesus. And maybe not Jesus in the way that other Christians look at him, but Jesus as a universalist. I think Jesus was a universalist. I think his whole message is, hey, it doesn't really matter what you are. Pardon me. You are beloved children of God.
Right.
It's all good. Do these things if you want to get closer, you know? So I think that possibly, and like you're saying, is the line between progressive Christianity and like Unitarian Universalism. Because that's one of the things that I always missed about the Unitarian Universalist church, was that there's no real central focus. It is highly intellectual. I appreciate that tremendously, but I still want a spiritual center. And sometimes in certain UU churches, spirituality is taboo. You know what I mean? It's too metaphysical. So they all have their unique character, just like all of our churches do as well. But I personally like to blend, you know, the mystical and the metaphysical with the logical and the reasonable and the intellectual, because this is what life is. We are spiritually intellectual creatures. So why not use both gifts? You know?
Yeah, I've been to a UU church once. It was the one in Naples. Actually, I went there twice. But maybe I just went there at bad times, but I just didn't find it to be a positive atmosphere.
Oh, wow.
I just left. I mean, it was just it was so intellectual that there was nothing that made my day about it. It was just like, really too logical. Like, it just didn't make me a happier person when I left. So I just thought, okay, this is not the community for me.
See, but you've hit on something important also that we haven't really spoken about with respect to meaning, and that's the emotional feeling that we get from making meaning. And religion should also be at least about, it should be emotional and in a variety of different ways, right? It should lift us up. It should break our hearts when we see injustice. Yeah. So I think we need to be in a place, or at least I need to be in a place where I can use my brain, but also use it so that I can have these sort of transcendent experiences that I can't necessarily explain, because they're just sort of emotional feelings. And it's that kind of in between knowing and sensing that I think the magic really happens, you know? And that's what I'm hoping we try to create here, is that space where there's enough different things going on. You know, there's some music, there's different prayer times, different styles of prayer, you know, all a little bit thing that I'm hoping that in different spaces, we still find that sort of mystical connection, even as we're sort of always discussing intellectually what all these things mean and how to deal with it. But again, that's tricky.
In between the discussion, there's time that you provide to celebrate, to find your spirit, or to go to a spiritual place, such as the tuning that occurs, or the time before communion, or the quiet when you read the names of the people on the prayer list. All of those are times to celebrate, as well as interact with each other during the discussion times. Oh, I like that. I like the fact that I'm not just being talked at.
Nobody likes that. I mean, honestly, nobody likes it. I don't think anybody ever liked it. It's just the way it was. So, you know.
And still is in places.
Yeah, it still is. But I've never felt I know enough to tell anybody this is the way it is. Because who knows? I don't know. I have a lot of ideas, and I've been my happiest when I'm just able to share my crazy ideas without being kicked out of a place. And you know, I've been doing that for 10 years here, so great. That's all I ask. I just want to. And so part of that is hearing everybody else's crazy ideas as well, and being able to tell each other, that's not that crazy. Or, yeah, that's way outside, because, every now and then we go a little outside. That's all right. You have to push the limits and break them to figure out what's going to stick, right? So, but again, I wish that, how do you tell people that this exists? And I think maybe even a larger question is, does anybody care? Are we currently living in an age or moving into an age where the whole idea of a religious organization of any sort is just irrelevant?
That's I'm
Yeah.
wondering about that too.
Yeah.
That yes, and I don't know. I guess I don't know the younger generation enough to know whether they're, what are their basic concerns. And of course, they want to establish their identity and get a job and get married, maybe, and maybe not. And so that's their work at that age. Is there anything else? Is there anything more than the job? I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't know.
I
And
mean,
it's hard because I grew up in an entirely different environment, where you went to church. Everybody in town went to church on Sunday. I mean, or the majority of them, not everybody.
yeah.
So
Yeah, I didn't. We were sent to church, but my parents didn't attend church except on Easter or Christmas, which made me almost angry. It's like, if you aren't going to bother to come every day, don't come on these days.
yeah, yeah.
Interesting.
Okay. So you had a different, that would be different environment. Yeah.
Well, and I grew up in a mixed religious household in the early days, I remember going to church, but we were really young when I stopped going to church, as I recall. And I was just curious, but I was still just curious about all of it. I don't know why, I just was. So I have to imagine that people are still being born who are just curious, mystically
Yeah.
curious, and they want to join some group of other mystically curious people. I
Right.
mean, people have been having mystical experiences long before we called it religion. So I don't think there's any reason to suspect that those mystical experiences, or at least those yearnings to search for answers, will ever stop, because I think that is part of being human. Part of the special nature of humanity is being able to ask these existential questions and then come up with theories to answer them, whether they're right or not. And then those theories tend to attract groups of like-minded people. So I'm wondering if part of what's happening right now is that these groups are just reorganizing, right? These traditional church groups, Baptists, Anabaptists, Presbyterians, Disciples of Christ, Catholics, Greek Orthodox, all of these different segments, if, like the rest of the society, if they are not now going through an upheaval because they're going to reorganize along new lines of interest that have nothing to do with creed and dogma, but everything to do with sort of about the mystical intellectual mix that these different systems will offer to the community of gathered people, kind of like what we're doing, right? I think each of these communities will sort of find a new character and
They
start
do.
to, right? And start to develop maybe even new organizations or things that are more loosely affiliated with one another than denominations were.
Right.
What amazes me is the growth of the more conservative churches.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't find why, except for the fact that maybe they guilt them into being an active member of the church.
But I don't want to offend anybody, so I've tried to ask this as carefully as I can. But some of the things that I see people still believe in the 21st century just make me smack my head.
Mm-hmm.
It's so superstitious. And a lot of the more conservative churches tend to have what I consider a very superstitious view of Jesus and the stories around him. And again,
Right.
this is fine if this is where you are, but at some point I have to ask myself, how,
How come?
why do you still, for example, case in point, somebody told me the other day that, Jesus was coming back to get ready. Jesus was coming back any minute now. This was the last plague. COVID's the last plague before he comes back. And if I don't repent right now, then I'm not going to be raptured.
Yes.
To which my response was, what? Where do you even start with that? I wanted to start with rapture
That's right.
because there's nothing about
That's
rapture
right.
in the Bible. It's just complete malarkey. But you can't do it. You can't get into that conversation. I know better. I don't have that kind of time. And it's not going to change this person's mind anyway. So what's the point? So instead, I sit back and incredulously think to myself, what? How? What?
I do too.
Yeah, that's well, it's throughout our whole culture. I mean, it is in religion, like the great rapture apocalypse, I mean, what I can't get through my head. I have always just imagined it's a little pocket, but it isn't a little pocket, and
Yeah.
it's hundreds of thousands of people that are in that pocket. And just like it is politically, that we've got millions of people who will defend Rittenhouse, who was carrying an AR-15 down the street after he had shot somebody. And, how come, it isn't rational. And are we going to ever come to logical thinking? I mean, we need a new age of reason.
Yes.
Out of the dark ages, we need, that's what the age of reason was. Let's use our minds a little bit about what in the world is happening here. And anyway, I don't know. I don't have the answer to that,
Thinking involves stepping into the unknown in a way. And
yes.
it's scary. And many people, I think, prefer to be told so they don't have to think.
Right.
It's also comforting when you've been raised a certain way to believe in a certain thing. That's your comfort zone. And I don't think people want to break out of it because then they're afraid they'll go to hell. And I do also think it's that scare tactic. If they didn't have that scare tactic, I don't think a lot of conservative churches would exist.
I agree.
Mm-hmm.
But I also have to question why it works. You know what I mean? Why does it work on some people but not everyone? And this is a good general question just for American society right now as well, right? Because scare tactics are part of are part of what's happening right now. We have one part of the country who's being kept in fear by a party who has decided that fear is the way that they're going to exist. Yeah. Whereas, do you know what I mean? And a lot of us are like, well, this is ridiculous. It's, first of all, everything you're saying is not true. Things aren't that bad and will not be that bad. But secondly, the only thing I have to fear is fear myself. What happened to that?
Right.
So why do you fall for it? I think part of what's important to understand is also why people are in that space. I should say why people fall for that. I don't mean to imply that people who are afraid right now don't necessarily have a legitimate fear. I don't want to delegitimize anybody because there are a lot of positions in this, and it's not a black and white issue whatsoever. However, there are fear mongers, and there are people who respond to that by doubling down on ideas that are provably untrue. I don't care if you've got an idea that maybe nobody can prove if it's true or false. God exists. God does not exist. Whatever. But both arguments are valid. I can't prove either one, right? But other arguments that are being made don't have that equal validity of side, even though people are really sticking to it. A part of that, being something like, if you don't believe in Christ, you're going to hell, right? Obviously, this transcends religion around the world right now. But I am also of the belief that even with the decline in religion that we're seeing right now, religion is still probably the number one influence on people's activities. Because, as you've all been implying, if people are afraid to go to hell, because this religion says if you leave this religion or ever start doubting anything in it, you're going to go to hell, then they're just going to do everything that that religion tells them to do. And then their day-to-day activities, whether they think about it or not, will be subtly and subconsciously influenced by all of the things that this religion has been telling them. So you're right, Anne, it's very, very difficult to break out of that sort of mode. And that's a model that a lot of people, especially the last 3 decades, grew up in. But it still happens today, even though I think it's probably to a lesser extent. But because a lot of people did grow up in that model, I think their kids also are rebelling against that model, which is still, I would say, the prevalent religious model. So, but not just rebelling against that model, just rebelling against the idea of religion in general, whether they do or do not believe in some sort of all-encompassing deity or theistic energy source.
Yeah, but they don't have another model. They don't have, well, what's out there, they really have to search for another model. It's not easily given, and even the other models are condemned, certainly by their tribal group, are condemned. So, they've got bad marks on them already. So it's tough, how do you move?
Yeah, and because your other model is not going to be a Christian model. There are no other models in Christianity. Well, there are, but they're hard to find.
Right.
So your other model is going to be Buddhism, probably. This is where I went, and my other model became Buddhism because I didn't like. Yeah, and I like that model. It's a teacher-student model.
Right.
It worked very well for me. Right. Even if I disagree with there are certain Buddhist cosmology ideas that I also am like, I don't think so. But that's cosmology. I mean, that's the way it's going to be. Otherwise, I think Buddhism and Christianity work very, very, very well together. Especially when you remove these sort of superstitious stories about the founders. Then you find Jesus and Buddha are saying very similar things to their followers, which are largely, be humble. Work for the common good. And in Jesus's case, love God and love your neighbor as yourself. It's not that difficult. Now, when you distill it down to that, that's really all you have to talk about. The rest of it is just studying and learning as much as possible from everything else. So, humans, we overcomplicate everything, and then we create these monolithic institutions that are then just impossible to topple because they've been around for so long, and yet everything must change.
That's the other thing I was going to say, is that in my view of Presbyterian as a denomination is that it's a theological stew, even, but when you come to institutional decisions, there's a book of order. And those people who are flying under the banner of Presbyterian, when they come to make a community decision, they have to follow the book of order. But that's the only thing that I see is that holds, and the same way with other denominations, that there's a behind the community is order. How do you do business? How do you make decisions? And the denominational books are still controlling those decisions, and that's what makes you a Presbyterian. It isn't theology, because the people who attend most of our churches, they wouldn't know, they might not even know what theology is, Really, I mean, it's something else. They're there in church for something more, but they wouldn't even know how to talk about it.
Yeah, which is fine, because
that's right.
because that's you're coming
And
for
so,
something else.
you
That's
know, we have Lutherans, Baptists, Roman Catholics, you know, former as so-called members of the Presbyterian Church,
right.
and the only thing that's really holding them together is a book of order that when a congregational meeting is called or they want a new pastor, tells them what to do.
That's great. That's the way it should be. That's great. So there's just there's structure. That's great. Yeah. Because a lot of as we all know, some denominations are not like that. All denominations have books of order and sort of
Yeah.
rules and regs about running, but a lot of
Formal
them
or
also,
informal, you know. I
yeah,
mean, if
yeah,
you don't have it formally, you have it informally. So.
yeah, exactly. But a lot of denominations also have a pretty strict dogma that if you veer from it, you
Oh
can't
yeah.
belong. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
So
Yeah.
like the Mormons, for example. I
Right.
mean,
Right.
it is going to be what it's going to be. And again, this is not a slam. I love Utah, and but what the plus side to that is what to expect in
Right.
every Mormon steakhouse or every Mormon house of worship that you go to. You know what you're going to get, and it makes for a very consistent experience, and it makes for a very cohesive community. So,
Right.
as we talk about sort of the decline of organized religion and institutional church, I don't think we're also talking about the decline of associated church organizations. You know what I mean? Because I think it would be, I do see new things developing, not just us, but other
Mm-hmm.
organizations too that are
Mm-hmm.
sort of starting to grow online and become these new entities that have people in different places where who knows what's going to happen. um, my hope actually is that eventually we're all going to have our own little small groups that we'll be doing things with, and maybe they're all some extension of a centralized thing or not, but it doesn't really matter. My end game for this whole thing has always just been to to help people feel comfortable with what they believed, because so often you're not allowed to say what you think, and only to do that so that we could all understand that the things that we say are probably more similar than not, and we can work together. We can work together. We can work together because we have to. I don't really care what you believe about life and death. Actually, that's not true. I do care what you believe about it because I find it absolutely fascinating, and it's one of my favorite things to talk about is what you believe. But I don't necessarily have to agree with it, and I don't expect you to necessarily agree with me for us to still do the work that we know needs to get done in the world, which is just a complete and utter razing to the ground and a building up on a new foundation, right? And we got to tear down this house. It's not working. It doesn't house everybody, first of all. It houses the people it does house. It houses inequitably, and it's just built on crap. So I say, get rid of it. Start over. And the only way to do that is to get everybody else on board. And the only way to do that is if we agree that our end game is the same, even if our process of getting there might be slightly different. It sounds so simple when it comes out of my mouth. Well, folks, before we depart today, these conversations always go so quickly. Thank you for tuning in today. First of all, I really appreciate the discussion. I like the midweek discussion. It kind of keeps me going, and I've started to discover that after we do this on Wednesday, as I finish up stuff on Thursday or try to get the meat of stuff finished, it comes out a little bit better. Although I'm still not exactly sure what's happening on Sunday, so we'll see. Let's go around and just check in a little bit, see if anybody's had anything that you want to share about anything, or any new spiritual ideas you want to share. We've discussed a lot of new spiritual ideas here today, I think, so that's been great. But anything else that's on your hearts or minds, that's fine. Who you want to kick us off?
I had I invited a friend. We've been friends for 10 years, but we hadn't, he only lives around on the block. And we hadn't seen each other since January because of COVID. But we decided that we wanted something more than Zoom. So we met on my front porch. We did social distance and the breeze was blowing. So we took off our masks and talked for, well, actually about 2 hours. And it was a wonderful experience to be back in relationship again with somebody that I've enjoyed sharing his life, and I think he enjoys sharing mine.
That's terrific, man. I'm so glad to hear that.
That was a plus experience.
Oh yeah, it has to make you wonder if after all of this is finally over, everybody's not going to be just so relieved to see another human being that maybe we'll be a little nicer to each other.
Maybe. Right.
Maybe. Charlotte, what's happening?
Yeah, because I was thinking as you were talking earlier, one of the things that is missing for me anyway in the Zoom meetings is the social connection, like Hugh was talking about, to just do something socially together where you can interact in person. I know you can do that via the computer, but it misses some part of humanity. So that being said, I have a lunch tomorrow with some of my PEO sisters. So we'll see how that goes, because we also are going to go to a park and social distance.
That's great. No, I think that'd be great. I was going to say something. Because I've said enough. What about you, Ann? How's everything?
Good. Nothing really new happening with me. I've been in an 8-week AmeriCorps summer position though, so that's ending soon.
Oh, wow. How's that been? Awesome.
It's been good. I've been doing contact tracing for the state of Colorado.
Wow, good for you.
Oh,
Thanks.
That's terrific.
Yeah. So I just hope that I can find some contact tracing to do once it's over. But yeah.
Unfortunately, I think there will be some.
yeah.
With all the universities.
There'll be a need anyway. We know that.
Man, I need to get you the name of this company. So last night, Trudy and I, along with our friend Alan, did our first, what we're calling Reentry 2.0 for prisoners who've been recently released. And I know, Trudy's been into prison ministry pretty much her whole life, but I got involved just a couple of years ago when I went with her to Family Day out at Everglades Correctional, and it was indescribable. I just loved it. It was great. It's a bunch of some of the most talented people I've ever met in my life. So we got involved, but then after COVID, of course, we had to stop going. But we've been part of this program. It's a national program called Horizons. And what's unusual about it is they actually take control of an entire dormitory at a prison, and they convert it from individual cells to group living. It's very military style, right? It looks like the Army. There's a bunch of cots and bunks, and everybody sleeps there. But these men have to take pledges, and there's coursework they have to complete, and it's a what is it? I think it's a 2-year program actually. And then once they complete that, they get fast tracked to some other things. So this was sort of a reunion of people who have graduated from the program. There are 34 right now at Everglades who can't get out because of COVID, but they're supposed to have been released already. And we had about 12 people show up last night. It was really, really awesome. It was just awesome. We did it here I created a separate virtual church space for it, but I did it with the Current background. And they know me as the pastor from the Current anyway, so it was really neat. But one of the guys mentioned a company that he's working for that's doing contact tracing, and they've been hiring a lot of ex-felons. So it was great for the guys in the group, but it's a nationwide thing. So I'll try to get the name of it, Ann, because I don't think you have to be a felon to do it. Although in your case, I don't know your background, but maybe you are. I'm just kidding. But it sounds, maybe it'll work out. I'll send you the link.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks.
Cool. That's great. Well, anything else? Everybody okay? This was delightful and invigorating. Thank you for all of the ideas. I appreciate the opportunity to just sort of freely share what's on my mind as well. I made a lot of notes today as well, Hugh, about some of the things that we talked about, and I'm sure they'll be cropping up in other conversations as we go along as well, and try to figure out what this little community that we call the Current is, and what kind of symbols and meaning we want to make as we go along. Thanks for tuning in today, guys. I'll see some of you Friday at 2 for Zoom, and I hope to see all of you Sunday at 9 for Wired Word or at 10:15 for God Connect. I hope the rest of your week is full of wonderful little surprises from unexpected places, just little signs that God is with you and that God loves you. Peace, my friends. See you soon.
Thank you.